One of the joys of being a book collector is accumulating the different titles and copies of the things that you enjoy. I am not a serious collector of Penguin books. I've got about 800 of them, and most of those I'm putting up for sale over the summer. But I wanted to go through some of them and just look at the way the cover design is done, looking at the edition or title numbers, and some of the print ages of these books. I've got a selection here, and let's have a look through them. Starting with this one by E.M. Forster, Where Angels Fear to Tread. It's a Penguin Modern Classic, 2 and 6, and its title number is 1344. So this is quite a modern book as Penguins go. They started in 1935. Let's have a look at this one. So this one is a 1962 edition, originally published in 1905, but this is a Penguin reprint from 1962. So it's already in its 60s as a book. It's in a decent copy, but I like it. In this sophisticated comedy, E.M. Forster takes a group of well-bred English people and exposes them to a situation which rouses each of them to violent and unexpected reactions. Nice and simple. It's got that grey colour wash to the top, like some of the other books that I'll show you today, and it's a nice copy from the 1960s. E.M. Forster. Here's a classic for me, one I grew up with, Cakes and Ale by Somerset Maugham. This is older than the previous one. It has the fiction script down the side, complete unabridged, a shilling and sixpence, and a little commentary about William Somerset Maugham and some of the histories of his books. He retired to the Riviera in 1940, according to this. Cakes and Ale, or The Skeleton in the Cupboard by Somerset Maugham. This edition, 1951. Different style. This is the early version of Penguin books. Different again, this one with a completely different vertical colour wash down the side by Gerald, Durrell, 3 shillings and sixpence. The Drunken Forest. Once again, he has returned from his explorations with another fascinating account of his adventures. Durrell has the ability of overcoming any ignorance or indifference to his own subject, and he will soon have the most disinterested reader crowing with delight over the habits of orange armadillos, horned toads, budgets, and other endearing animals once you get to know them. The Drunken Forest by Gerald, Durrell. Let's have a look. It's got some nice illustrations by Ralph Thompson, and this edition, 1962. Pre-Penguin publishing, it was published by Rupert Hart Davis in 1956. Penguin took it on in 1958, so only 2 years after its first publishing. Lots of popularity for Gerald Durrell. 1962, this edition of The Drunken Forest. And some damage here to the cover. The title number is 1314. The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. What a flurry of excitement these early books on science fiction and world ending his books created, and I've got quite a few of these, but this one, 2 shillings and sixpence, title number 993. And let's have a look at the dating on this. So this is a 1958 reprint, second reprint, published in 1951, 1954, and then the 1958 date for this one. Now, at the time of this book being published, on the jacket cover it says, he wrote The Day of the Triffids, which has already been translated into 6 languages, and followed it with The Kraken Wakes, The Chrysalids, and The Midwich Cuckoos. I've got all of those in different versions from different years, but a superb story even today. Changing colour for a moment, the green books in the Penguin series are associated with crime stories, often cosy crime stories, but some of them quite violent. This one, A Corpse in the Publisher's Strong Room, Flowers for the Judge by Marjorie Allingham. Our title number here is an earlier one, 459. And this edition is a very clean copy. I like this one. 1961, so another book from the 60s. What Penguin did in the mid-1930s when they started was launch a whole series of affordable, easy to get hold of, softback books. For great price and good covers, these books became incredibly popular. Here's a very different one, much more modern. George and Wyndham Grossmith, The Diary of a Nobody. I remember we had to read this at school, and I think we had mixed views of it in the classroom. Some of us loved it, some of us were quite bored by it. And I think those of us who didn't understand why this was being shared with us as part of our timetable or our English language curriculum was because nobody really explained its significance. Let's have a look at the back of this one and understand why it became so popular. The genuine hallmark of humour is comparatively rare in English literature, but there is no mistaking its stamp in The Diary of a Nobody. It is a straight-faced imaginary journal of suburban life in Holloway, which is North London, when that region of London was a highly respectable neighbourhood. The rueful hero who records his daily endeavours and misfortunes is an aptly named person called Mr. Pooter, a city clerk whose overdeveloped sense of dignity does not in the least prevent him from relapses into the ridiculous. He is destined to become everybody's butt and to involve himself in unseemly disputes with tradesmen, domestics, and practical jokers. The ruffled complacency of this Victorian Malvolio incites him to set down these untoward incidents in a prim, old-fashioned style which heightens their absurdity and makes him more than ever a figure of fun to those who, unlike himself, see the joke. And that's why it was so funny. Beautiful illustrations. Let's see who did the illustrations. Lupin. Young Pitt called out hornpipe as I passed his desk. Mr. Franching of Peckham. Mr. Farmerson smokes all the way home in the cab. Let's have a look. The Laurels, that's the house where they lived, or where he lived. Illustrations by Wyndham Grossmith, one of the two brothers who wrote this book. This copy is 1968, but look at that. Originally published in book form in 1892. I read it at school in 1976, I remember reading it at school, and how it has lasted. We read the version at school in a classics collection that was different from this, but not so dissimilar. It may have been a Penguin, I cannot remember, and I don't have a copy from school days, but how that book has lasted, 1892, it's still being published today by Penguin, and we're now in the 2020s. George and Wyndham Grossmith, The Diary of a Nobody, and that is Penguin edition, title number 510. We looked at an earlier book by John Wyndham, The Day of the Triffids. Here is The Chrysalids, the thrilling and realistic account of a world beset by genetic mutations, a worthy successor to The Day of the Triffids. Much charm and impressive technical skill. Let's have a look and see when this was published. Again, 1961. It's a reprint, originally published by Penguin in 1958, prior to that by Michael Joseph in 1953, but it's a nice condition, good clean pages, and I might start reading those again, I think. Here's a very famous one, J.B. Priestley, The Good Companions. J.B. Priestley was a Yorkshire author. About a mile from my house, on the way into town, is a beautiful bronze statue of him outside the art and cinema complex overlooking City Square. J.B. Priestley, The Good Companions. This one you can see was 6 shillings. I wonder who did the illustration for this copy. Let's have a look. Copyright J.B. Priestley, reprinted 1964, originally published in 1929. On a lot of Penguin books, you see the artist name. Oh, it's a Hogarth. Cover drawing by Paul Hogarth. And here it says on the jacket cover, "Here indeed is a truly great novel, which, so far from being dead and forgotten within a season or two, will find more and more friends as the years pass by." Much larger than a lot of the other books, if we look at these by comparison for actual width or depth of the book by page number, very significant. This is a Penguin number 1683 and in a nice readable condition. J.B. Priestley, The Good Companions. Another classic book, Vile Bodies by Evelyn Waugh. Again, the older version of the fiction wording down the sides of the front cover, £1.06, that tells us it's an early copy. The Penguin title number is an early one, 136. Let's have a look at the age of this beautiful book. Okay, this is 1951, so this is one of the earliest books we've looked at in this little, fairly random selection, originally published in 1930, Evelyn Waugh, Vile Bodies. Possibly my favourite book of my lifetime, Fair Stood the Wind for France, written about the flight of a bomber crew going into Europe and an aircraft that is shot down over France. The book focuses really on one of the crew members who joins the resistant teams that are smuggling airmen out of France, across Vichy France, through Spain, over the Pyrenees, into Spain and back to England. But it covers the romance of this particular character with a French girl who is part of the family that hide him and look after him whilst he recovers from his injuries. And then there is a beautiful travel journey by those two across occupied France. It's a gorgeous book. I've always loved the work of H.E. Bates, as much as anything for the way he captures not just human nature, but nature and landscape, and writes about the landscape in which all of his stories are set. Very much countryside stories. Fair Stood the Wind for France, £3.06. A beautiful comment on the back. Simple and direct in its characterization and writing, Fair Stood the Wind for France is perhaps the finest novel of the war. The scenes are exquisitely done and the characters, tenderly and beautifully drawn, are an epitome of all that is best in the youth of the two countries. This is a fine, lovely book which makes the heart beat with pride. It is, I promise you, this is a gorgeous book. The Penguin title number is 1279. This edition, let's have a look, because he wrote several books as Flying Officer X, written during the war in the mid-1940s, I think 1942 and 43. But then this was the book that he published as a war story, a love story, under his own name. This edition, 1961, originally published by Michael Joseph, 1944, and then first time in Penguin, 1958. This one, 1961, so we're looking at a book that is 63 years old and in super condition. Absolutely my favourite book. There's no doubt in my mind about this one. Yes, here it says, in 1941 he was commissioned as a writer by the Royal Air Force and under the pseudonym of Flying Officer X wrote two famous books of short stories, The Greatest People in the World and How Sleep the Brave, which were followed in 1945 when Mr. Bates discarded his wartime pseudonym by Fair Stood the Wind for France. Again, beautiful clean pages, not that much yellowing for a book that is in its 60s, and a fabulous read. Fair Stood the Wind for France. Let's do one more. This one, The White Peacock by D.H. Lawrence, complete and unabridged, £3.06. Title number for this one, 761. This copy is an early one, reprinted 1954, first published in 1911 and published by Penguin Books for the first time in 1950. Again, an author of prodigious output, huge productivity as a writer, and I've got every single one of his books, mostly in the early versions from when they came out, different types. So, for example, This one, Sons and Lovers, from the 1960s. A different version from the late 1980s, The Prussian Officer. Twilight in Sicily, a beautiful copy with a very clean cover and artwork. Women in Love, one that matches the Prussian Officer series in terms of the artwork. It has exactly the same eagle on the cover, and a whole range of his books, and I'll talk about those perhaps in another video. But it's been brilliant just to look at a series of books that I have read and enjoyed over the years, all penguins in different formats, different colour types, but ranging from this little Vile Bodies by Evelyn Waugh with 136 as its cover number, and the highest one on here, let's have a look, 1344, is that E.M. Forster book, Where Angels Fear to Tread. If you haven't got penguin books on your shelves, if you haven't got penguin books in your collection, maybe now is the time just to start having a look for them and find ones that you're going to enjoy. They have amazing travel books or travelogues within their series, those crime books under the green covers, the reissue of the Penguin Modern Classic series with beautiful cover work, very much like this one. This is an earlier version, this one from a few years later. But get yourself a penguin book and find yourself reading beautiful books that have always stood the test of time because of the quality of the writing.